The Assyrians, empire of iron and fear. For 300 years, one empire dominated the ancient world through sheer terror, the Assyrians. Between 900 and 612 BCE, they built the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from Egypt to Persia. Their armies were unstoppable machines of conquest. They invented psychological warfare, deporting entire populations and displaying gruesome punishments to terrify enemies into surrender. Yet they also built magnificent libraries, engineered irrigation systems, and created art of breathtaking beauty. They weren't just warriors, they were administrators, scholars, engineers. Then, in 612 BCE, their capital, Nineveh, burned. The empire collapsed so completely that for 2,000 years, people thought the Assyrians were just biblical mythology. Who were they really? Let's discover the truth. The story begins around 2500 BCE in a small city called Ashur on the Tigris River in northern Mesopotamia, modern Iraq. This wasn't glamorous territory. Unlike the rich farmlands of southern Mesopotamia, where the Sumerians built their civilization, Ashur sat in harsher terrain. But it had something valuable: location. Ashur controlled trade routes connecting Mesopotamia to Anatolia, the Mediterranean, and Persia. Control the crossroads, control the wealth. Early Ashur was unremarkable, just another Mesopotamian city-state overshadowed by more powerful neighbors. The Sumerians to the south had invented writing and built the first cities. The Akkadians under Sargon had created the first empire. Ashur absorbed these influences, adopting cuneiform writing, Mesopotamian gods, and urban organization. But they remained small players for over 1,000 years. Their primary god was Ashur, the city's divine patron. Unlike other Mesopotamian gods, who had complex personalities and myths, Ashur was different. He represented order, power, and the destiny of his people. The king wasn't just a political leader, he was Ashur's earthly representative, responsible for expanding the god's territory. This theology would later justify endless conquest. Every war was holy, every expansion glorified Ashur. Life in early Ashur centered on agriculture and craft production. Farmers cultivated barley and wheat in irrigated fields along the Tigris. Shepherds grazed sheep and goats in surrounding hills. Artisans worked copper and bronze, creating tools, weapons, and religious objects. Most people lived in mud brick houses with flat roofs, keeping animals on the ground floor and living upstairs. Family was everything. Society was patriarchal and hierarchical, with distinct classes of nobles, free citizens, and slaves. The first recognizable Assyrian rulers emerged around 2000 BCE. Local strongmen who built temples, led military campaigns, and tried to carve out independence from whoever was dominating Mesopotamia at the time. They were ambitious but weak, constantly threatened by more powerful kingdoms. Survival required cunning, adaptability, and patience. The Assyrians learned to wait, to build strength slowly, to strike when enemies were distracted. These lessons would serve them well. By 1800 BCE, Ashur was ready to become something more than a minor trading post. Assyrian merchants were spreading across Anatolia, establishing commercial colonies that would make them rich. The foundation was being laid for something extraordinary. Between 2000 and 1750 BCE, Assyrian merchants created one of history's first long-distance trading networks. They established commercial colonies called kurums across Anatolia, particularly at Kanesh, modern Kultepe in Turkey. This wasn't military conquest, but economic imperialism. Assyrian traders settled in foreign cities, married local women, learned local languages, and built vast fortunes moving tin and textiles from Ashur to Anatolia in exchange for silver and gold. These merchants kept detailed records on clay tablets that archaeologists have recovered by the thousands. We can read their business contracts, their complaints about slow donkey caravans, their worries about bandits, their family letters. One merchant writes home, "I sent you 5 donkey loads of tin. Did they arrive? Please send word immediately." Another complains that his business partners are cheating him. The mundane details reveal sophisticated commercial networks with credit systems, partnerships, insurance arrangements, and legal contracts. Life for these merchants was complex. They lived abroad for years, maintaining 2 households, one in Ashur and one in Anatolia. They operated under foreign laws, but maintained Assyrian identity. They negotiated trade agreements with local rulers, paid taxes to Anatolian kings and Assyrian authorities, and constantly balanced competing loyalties. Many became wealthy, building large houses in Ashur and commissioning votive offerings for temples. This commercial success funded political power back home. Around 1813 BCE, King Shamshi-Adad I seized control of Ashur and created the first territorial Assyrian Empire, conquering neighboring cities and establishing control over Upper Mesopotamia. He was a brilliant administrator, organizing his kingdom into provinces governed by appointed officials, often his own sons. He established efficient courier systems for rapid communication and demanded regular reports from provincial governors. But Shamshi-Adad's empire was personal, held together by his charisma and military prowess. When he died around 1776 BCE, it collapsed. Enemies attacked from all directions. The great trading network with Anatolia died as Hittites conquered the region. Hammurabi of Babylon conquered southern Mesopotamia. For the next 4 centuries, Assyria would struggle for survival, dominated by foreign powers, barely maintaining independence. Yet, this period wasn't wasted. The Assyrians learned valuable lessons about administration, record-keeping, and military organization. They absorbed cultural influences from Hurrians, Hittites, Egyptians, and Kassites. They were patient, building strength quietly, waiting for their moment to strike back. For centuries after Shamshi-Adad's death, Assyria was caught between greater powers. The Mitanni kingdom, dominated by Hurrian-speaking aristocrats, controlled northern Mesopotamia. The Hittites ruled Anatolia. The Kassites controlled Babylon. Assyria survived by playing them against each other, switching alliances, paying tribute, occasionally rebelling when opportunity arose. Then, around 1365 BCE, the balance shifted. Hittites and Egyptians were fighting for control of Syria. Mitanni was weakening, torn by internal conflict. King Ashur-uballit I saw his chance. He threw off Mitanni overlordship, conquered surrounding territory, and declared Assyria a great power. He even married his daughter to the Kassite king of Babylon, inserting Assyrian influence into Mesopotamian politics. The Middle Assyrian period saw important internal developments. Kings reorganized the army, creating standing regiments supplementing militia levies. They standardized provincial administration, appointing governors directly responsible to the king. They compiled law codes regulating society with harsh precision. The Middle Assyrian laws are striking for their brutality, especially toward women. Women who committed adultery could be killed by their husbands. Women accused of theft could be mutilated. Punishments included cutting off ears, noses, breasts, and fingers. These laws reflected a rigidly patriarchal society where women were property, controlled by fathers, then husbands, with limited independent rights. Yet some women from elite families wielded considerable influence as mothers of kings or priestesses in important temples. Architecture flourished during this period. Kings rebuilt the Temple of Ashur with increasingly elaborate decoration. They constructed palaces demonstrating royal power. They excavated irrigation canals extending agriculture. Relief sculptures began showing kings as mighty warriors, hunting lions and conquering enemies, establishing visual propaganda traditions that later kings would perfect. But then, around 1200 BCE, catastrophe struck the entire eastern Mediterranean. The Bronze Age collapsed. Empires fell. Trade networks disintegrated. Mysterious sea peoples destroyed cities across the region. The Hittite Empire vanished overnight. Egypt barely survived. Assyria was severely weakened, losing territory and retreating behind its borders. For 2 centuries, Assyria entered a dark age of diminished power and cultural stagnation. But unlike many civilizations destroyed by the Bronze Age collapse, Assyria survived. And survival meant they'd learned another crucial lesson: adaptability. They'd adapt again, transforming themselves into something unprecedented. Around 911 BCE, King Adad-nirari II began Assyria's resurgence. For generations, Assyrian kings had been consolidating power, slowly expanding territory, rebuilding military strength. Adad-nirari launched the expansion that would create the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the largest empire the ancient world had yet seen. What made Neo-Assyrian armies so dominant? First, professionalization. Unlike earlier militias of farmers fighting seasonally, the Neo-Assyrian army was professional, paid, trained year-round, and ready for constant campaigning. Second, technological superiority. Iron weapons were becoming common, but Assyrians excelled at metallurgy, producing superior swords, spearheads, and armor. Third, diversification. Assyrian armies combined heavy infantry, cavalry, chariots, archers, and siege engineers into coordinated fighting forces. But technology wasn't their secret weapon. Terror was. The Assyrians pioneered psychological warfare on an industrial scale. When a city resisted, Assyrian kings didn't just defeat it, they made examples. Captured defenders were impaled on stakes outside city walls. Kings boasted in their inscriptions, "I flayed the nobles who had rebelled, and draped their skins over the walls. I cut off the hands of some, the fingers of others. I gouged out the eyes of many soldiers." These weren't empty threats. Archaeological evidence and royal inscriptions confirm these atrocities happened regularly. The purpose was strategic. If one city's horrific fate convinced 10 others to surrender without fighting, Assyria saved lives and resources. Resistance became irrational. Better to surrender, pay tribute, and live. This calculation was brutally effective. Most cities surrendered. For conquered populations, life under Assyrian rule meant 2 terrible fates. Some paid crushing tribute: grain, metals, livestock, slaves, anything valuable. Others faced deportation. Assyrian kings systematically relocated entire populations, moving Babylonians to Syria, Syrians to Iran, shattering ethnic and political identities. These deportees weren't killed, but resettled as imperial subjects, deliberately mixed with other populations to prevent rebellion. For Assyrian soldiers, life meant constant campaigning. Training was brutal. Discipline was absolute. Desertion meant execution. But success brought rewards: plunder, land grants, social advancement. Many deportees were settled as military colonists on frontiers, creating loyal populations with vested interests in imperial stability. The Assyrian military machine was emerging, unstoppable and terrifying. Kings were ready to use it to build an empire stretching from Egypt to Persia. Assyrian kings didn't just conquer, they built. Every successful king constructed massive architectural projects demonstrating divine favor and unlimited power. Palaces became larger, temples more elaborate, cities grander. Architecture was propaganda carved in stone. King Ashurnasirpal II reigning 883 to 859 BCE, rebuilt the city of Kalhu, modern Nimrud, as his new capital. His palace was extraordinary. The throne room measured over 40 meters long, its walls covered with carved stone reliefs showing the king hunting lions, receiving tribute, and conquering enemies. These weren't just decorations, they were political messages. Visitors walking to meet the king passed hundreds of carved panels showing what happened to those who defied Assyria. The palace's lamassu, massive stone guardian figures with human heads, bull bodies, and eagle wings, stood at gates. Carved from single limestone blocks weighing up to 30 tons, they were engineering marvels. How did Assyrians move them? Thousands of workers using wooden sledges, rollers, and sheer muscle power. Inscriptions boast of armies of laborers, many of them deportees, building royal monuments. Inside palaces, life was luxurious beyond imagination. Kings feasted on elaborate meals, roasted meats, dates, pomegranates, wine from every corner of the empire. They wore finest textiles, embroidered robes, jewelry of gold and precious stones. They maintained harems of wives and concubines. They hunted lions in royal game parks, proving their courage and strength. But royal life was also deeply ritualistic. Kings performed religious ceremonies constantly. They consulted priests who examined animal livers for omens before every major decision. They commissioned elaborate prayers and hymns. They presented offerings to temples. The king was both supreme commander and chief priest, responsible for maintaining cosmic order. High officials and nobles lived almost as well. They received land grants, tax income from provinces, shares of plunder. They built their own palaces, though never rivaling the king's. Competition for royal favor was intense. Nobles intrigued, formed factions, and occasionally staged coups when kings appeared weak. Assyria also pioneered hydraulic engineering. Kings constructed massive irrigation systems, canals carrying water from distant rivers and mountains to cities and fields. One inscription boasts of a canal 30 miles long, cut through solid rock. These projects were practical and symbolic, demonstrating the king's ability to command nature itself. The empire reached its zenith under Tiglath-Pileser III, who reigned 745 to 727 BCE. He was a military genius and administrative reformer who transformed Assyria permanently. Previous kings had conquered territory but struggled to hold it. Rebellions erupted constantly. Tiglath-Pileser solved this problem systematically. First, military reform. He enlarged the standing army dramatically, creating specialized units, heavy infantry with long spears and large shields, light infantry with bows, cavalry for rapid movement, and siege specialists with battering rams and siege towers. He instituted strict logistical systems, ensuring armies remained supplied during year-long campaigns. He personally led armies every year, constantly expanding and consolidating territory. Second, administrative revolution. Instead of ruling through local kings who paid tribute and frequently rebelled, Tiglath-Pileser annexed conquered territories as Assyrian provinces, governed by appointed officials. These governors were rotated frequently to prevent them from building independent power bases. They reported directly to the king through an elaborate bureaucratic system. Third, mass deportation became systematic policy. Tiglath-Pileser and his successors moved hundreds of thousands of people. The Bible records the deportation of Israelites after Assyria conquered the northern kingdom in 722 BCE. This was just one of many such operations. Deportees were skilled workers, farmers, artisans, soldiers. They were resettled where the empire needed their skills, deliberately mixing populations to destroy ethnic identities that might fuel rebellion. The result was an empire of unprecedented size. By 700 BCE, Assyria controlled modern Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, parts of Turkey, Iran, and even Egypt. This was larger than any previous empire. Communication across this vast territory required elaborate systems of royal roads, relay stations, and couriers carrying messages in cuneiform on clay tablets. Provincial governors faced enormous responsibilities. They collected taxes, maintained order, raised troops, administered justice, supervised public works, and sent regular reports to the capital. These reports, thousands of which survive, reveal the empire's daily operation: complaints about banditry, reports on harvest yields, requests for additional troops, intelligence about enemy movements. Military commanders were professional soldiers who'd risen through ranks. They led campaigns, besieged cities, negotiated surrenders, administered conquered territory. Success brought rewards. Failure meant disgrace or death. The pressure was immense, but so were the opportunities for ambitious men. The Sargonid dynasty, beginning with Sargon II in 722 BCE, brought Assyrian power to its peak, but also exposed fatal weaknesses. Succession was never automatic. Brothers, uncles, and cousins constantly plotted to seize the throne. Every royal death risked civil war. Sargon II was likely a usurper who seized power after his predecessor died in battle. To legitimize himself, he built an entirely new capital at Dur-Sharukin, modern Khorsabad, with a palace covering 25 acres. But Sargon died violently in Anatolia. His body was never recovered, considered a terrible omen. His son, Sennacherib, immediately abandoned Khorsabad and moved to Nineveh. Sennacherib, reigning 705 to 681 BCE, was brilliant and ruthless. When Babylon rebelled, he besieged it for years, then completely destroyed it in 689 BCE, diverting the Euphrates River over its ruins. This shocked the ancient world. Babylon was sacred, culturally revered even by Assyrians. Destroying it seemed sacrilegious. His own sons murdered him, possibly in revenge for this act. Esarhaddon seized power, killing his brothers and rebuilding Babylon to appease the gods. He conquered Egypt in 671 BCE, Assyria's greatest triumph, but died campaigning in 669 BCE. His son Ashurbanipal inherited the empire at its maximum extent. Ashurbanipal, reigning 668 to 627 BCE, was the last great king. He was educated, literate, and passionate about scholarship. He created history's first systematically organized library at Nineveh, collecting thousands of tablets from across the empire. Myths, medical texts, astronomical observations, religious rituals. The Epic of Gilgamesh survived because of Ashurbanipal's library. Scholars and scribes held honored positions. They studied omens, interpreted dreams, advised kings, and preserved ancient literature. They developed sophisticated astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. Assyrian physicians performed surgeries, set bones, and prescribed herbal remedies. But even Ashurbanipal faced constant warfare. His brother ruled Babylon, but rebelled in 652 BCE, starting a devastating civil war. Ashurbanipal won, but the empire was exhausted, setting the stage for collapse. Nineveh was Assyria's magnificent heart, transformed by Sennacherib into antiquity's greatest city. He expanded it massively, building 15 gates in walls stretching 7.5 miles. The walls stood 40 feet high, wide enough for 3 chariots racing side by side. Watchtowers rose every 100 feet. The defences seemed impregnable. Sennacherib built The palace without rival, covering 8 acres with 70 rooms. Its walls displayed carved stone reliefs showing military campaigns in photographic detail. Armies marching, cities besieged, prisoners executed. The famous Lachish relief sequence depicted battering rams, archers, defenders hurling stones, captured defenders impaled. These images were terror propaganda, demonstrating the price of resistance. Sennacherib solved water problems by constructing sophisticated irrigation systems. He built at least 18 canals, including one over 30 miles long, with an aqueduct spanning valleys. Recent research suggests he created elaborate irrigated gardens, possibly inspiring later legends of the Hanging Gardens, traditionally attributed to Babylon. The Hanging Gardens might actually have been in Nineveh. Nineveh's population reached perhaps 100,000, enormous for ancient times. The population was incredibly diverse: Assyrians, Babylonians, Arameans, Egyptians, Greeks, Persians, deportees from dozens of peoples. They spoke multiple languages and practiced various crafts. Markets bustled with merchants selling Egyptian linen, Arabian incense, Persian horses, Phoenician purple dye. Religious life centered on temples, particularly Ishtar's temple. Major festivals drew huge crowds. Priests performed elaborate ceremonies. Musicians played harps and drums. Processions carried divine statues through streets, reinforcing imperial ideology. Ordinary people lived harder lives in crowded mud-brick houses on narrow streets. They worked as laborers, craftsmen, servants, and soldiers. Women managed households and wove textiles. Children helped with family work. Life was short. Most died before 40. Disease and violence were common. Yet Nineveh represented something unprecedented, a truly cosmopolitan imperial capital where dozens of cultures mixed, where wealth from an entire empire concentrated, where power seemed eternal and unshakable. After Ashurbanipal died around 627 BCE, the empire collapsed with shocking speed. Civil war erupted as rivals fought for the throne. Weak kings succeeded rapidly. Our governors became independent. The army, exhausted after centuries of constant warfare, was overstretched and demoralized. External enemies sensed weakness. In Babylon, Nabopolassar seized power in 626 BCE and declared independence. In Persia, the Medes under Cyaxares unified into a powerful kingdom. These two powers allied specifically to destroy Assyria. Scythian cavalry raiders from the steppes joined them. The war was brutal. Assyrian armies fought desperately but were overwhelmed. In 614 BCE, the Medes captured and destroyed Ashur, the ancient holy city. They massacred its population and burned its temples. The fall of Ashur broke Assyria's spiritual heart. In 612 BCE, Median and Babylonian armies besieged Nineveh. The siege lasted 3 months. Defenders fought with desperate courage, knowing their fate. Finally, possibly aided by flooding that weakened walls, attackers broke through. What followed was annihilation. Coalition forces slaughtered the population, plundered treasures, and burned the city. The destruction was so complete that ancient sources describe fires burning for days. Assyrian survivors rallied at Haran in northern Syria, but the coalition pursued them relentlessly. By 609 BCE, organized Assyrian resistance ended. The empire that had dominated the Near East for 3 centuries vanished in less than 20 years. Why such hatred? Conquered peoples had endured centuries of brutal occupation, crushing tribute, mass deportation, and constant humiliation. When Assyria weakened, they took revenge. Ancient sources describe celebrations across the Near East when Nineveh fell. The prophet Nahum expressed typical sentiment. "Woe to the city of blood, full of lies and plunder." The destruction was so thorough that Nineveh disappeared from history. Sand covered the ruins. Farmers cultivated fields over buried palaces. Within generations, people forgot where the great city stood. For 2,000 years, Nineveh existed only in biblical references. Many scholars doubted it ever existed. The Assyrian Empire died, but Assyrian people survived. They didn't vanish when their empire fell. Instead, they adapted, preserved identity, and created new ways of being Assyrian without political independence. Many Assyrians continued living in ancestral territories under Babylonian, then Persian rule. They remained distinct, speaking Aramaic, which had become the empire's administrative language. When Alexander conquered the region, Assyrians remained. When Rome ruled the Near East, Assyrians were there. They were survivors. Christianity transformed Assyrian identity fundamentally. In early centuries CE, many converted to Christianity, creating distinct Syriac Christian churches. The Assyrian Church of the East, the Chaldean Catholic Church, and the Syriac Orthodox Church. These churches preserved Aramaic as liturgical language, maintained ancient traditions, and provided institutional structure, preserving Assyrian identity for nearly 2 millennia. Through centuries of Islamic rule, these Christian communities survived. They faced discrimination and occasional persecution, but endured. During the Islamic Golden Age, Assyrian Christians translated Greek philosophical and scientific works into Arabic, transmitting ancient knowledge to medieval Islamic civilization. In the 19th century, European archaeologists rediscovered ancient Assyria. Austin Henry Layard excavated Nimrud and Nineveh in the 1840s, uncovering stunning reliefs, colossal Lamassu, and Ashurbanipal's library. Suddenly, Assyria was real again, not just biblical mythology. Museums in London, Paris, and Berlin filled with Assyrian artifacts. This archaeological rediscovery inspired modern Assyrian nationalism. Assyrian Christians began emphasizing dissent from the ancient empire. Assyrian political movements emerged seeking autonomy. This identity remains powerful today. Modern Assyrians in Iraq, Syria, Iran, and diaspora communities worldwide claim direct descent from the ancient empire. The 20th century brought tragedy. During World War I, Assyrian Christians suffered genocide in the Ottoman Empire alongside Armenians and Greeks. Hundreds of thousands died. Survivors scattered worldwide. Recent conflicts in Iraq and Syria devastated Assyrian communities again, forcing mass emigration. Yet Assyrians survive. They preserve their language, maintain their churches, remember their history. The ancient empire is gone, but its people endure. That's the ultimate Assyrian legacy. Not conquests or terror, but stubborn survival of a people who refuse to vanish from history.